Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Rita Chaudhary of the Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture, University of Calcutta. I am presently the head and an associate professor of the department. Today we will be discussing foreign sources as a source for the study of early Indian and medieval history. Now in module 1 we have already studied indigenous sources, and now we will see how important are foreign accounts for our study. Now the learning objectives of this module is to understand the importance of foreign sources, to discuss the early period consisting of classical sources, Chinese sources, Arab, Persian and other sources. Then we go on to the medieval period, which consists of chronicles, and last is we discuss the foreign accounts of the period concerned. Now, the importance, while discussing the importance of sources in the introductory part, we must be aware of the fact that we have already discussed the indigenous and archaeological sources, and we have seen that there are many gaps which need to be filled up. The reconstruction of the history of India would have been incomplete without the foreign sources, which include accounts written by foreign travelers who visited the subcontinent from time to time. The map here depicts the routes taken by foreign travelers in their visit to India. They had come from various parts of Europe and from Asia, Western Asia, Central Asia, and the maps depict the routes taken by them. Then we go on to the introduction, where we try to understand who had come to India, importance of their work. The Greeks, Romans, Chinese, Tibetans and Muslims left valuable accounts regarding the political, social, religious and cultural life of ancient and medieval India. Amongst them, special mention may be made of Megasthenes, the Greek ambassador, Huensang, Xuanzang, Chinese pilgrim and Al-Biruni, Arab traveller. Some other foreign writers did not visit India but came to know about the land from a variety of sources and have accordingly recorded their ideas. These writings, though are not eyewitness accounts, are valuable too, especially when they are supportive evidence to what we have already obtained from the other sources. Although understanding the truth about India from a foreigner's disposition is a difficult task, but it is much easier to determine the age of these foreign compositions than those of indigenous ancient writers. Here we would like to mention that we have already spoken of using the Vedic texts, the Puranas, the epics, etc. as sources of early Indian history, but we have also noted that it is very difficult to determine the exact age when they were written, because they contain innumerable interpolations. Now we know when it is really beneficial about foreign accounts that we know when they had come to India and what they were writing about. The foreign sources, which include accounts in books given by foreign writers, can be broadly classified into sources of the early period till 12th century CE, sources of the medieval period 13th to 18th century CE. Now we will discuss the sources that we have for the study of the early period of Indian history. First, we come to the classical sources, which contain of writings of Greek and other foreign travelers. Herodotus, circa 484 to 425 or 413 BCE, who is called the father of history, gave some useful information in his account along with great deal of fairy tales. He was the first to have used the name India in his book Historia. He used the name in the context of the expansion of the Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus and Darius. It did not signify the whole of the Indian subcontinent, but the lower Indus region. Herein we must remember that He did not visit India personally, but he collected all his information from Persian travelers, and so his book is based on hearsay evidence, which are not always authentic. Titius, the classical Greek physician, wrote a book called Indica in the 5th century BCE, purporting to describe Sindh. Although the book did serve as an original source for some incisive knowledge of India in the West, the accounts largely consist of incredible fables. So, the importance of this book is doubtful for the study of ancient Indian history. Now, the greatest interest attaches itself to the writings of those Greeks who accompanied Alexander to India, especially the account of Megasthenes, within brackets 350 BCE to 290 BCE, and his book is entitled The Indica. It gives a complete account of India, about the King Chandragupta Maurya, about his administration, and also about the Indian society. Unfortunately, his work is lost and has been preserved in books based upon him, written by later scholars like Diodorus, Strabo, Arrian, Pliny, and Justin. Their accounts are significant because they refer to social divisions, weather conditions, and abundance of crops in India. Here I would like to pause and tell you something about the social divisions that they refer to. Now, generally, during this time, we have the Arthashastra of Kautilya, who upholds the Brahminical ideal of social division in India based on the 4 Varnas. But in Megasthenes, we find the society being divided into 7 meros or genos. Now, we must understand that we have often mistaken the fact that Megasthenes refers to 7 castes, but meros and genos does not refer to castes. They at most we can say that he found 7 social divisions in India, and they included philosophers, the cultivators, pastoralists, administrators, accessors, spies, and all the various classes that he saw in India. But the mistake is natural, because he says that all the classical writers say that they cannot change their professions, nor can they marry outside their own caste, or in other words, they support the non-changeability of professions and endogamy, which are important facets of the caste system. But nowhere do they say that these constitute the Varnas of ancient Indian society. So, it is doubtful whether we can use Megasthenes' accounts in elucidating the Varna system in ancient India. Now, we have later accounts like that of the Periplus of the Eritrean Sea. It has been written by an anonymous writer. Of the later accounts, special reference may be made of the classical writers who have elucidated the geography and natural history of India. The map depicts the various ports and towns that have been referred to in the Periplus, and the routes that were taken the trade routes that were taken by merchants from the West Asia to India, and from India to West Asia. So, we have already mentioned the anonymous author of the Periplus of the Eritrean Sea. This account, full of interesting information, is worth its weight in gold, as it has preserved from oblivion a phase of the trade and maritime activity in ancient India, otherwise unknown. So, now I just say a little bit about Periplus, which I have already mentioned, that he mentions all the ports and towns along the coast of India, the eastern and the western coast, and the routes taken by traders to travel to the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, and the trader, and vice versa. Now, he has mentioned, very interestingly, he has mentioned the use of the monsoon winds along trade, which sailors took advantage of to sail to the western part of the regions. Now, we have later accounts like the Christian topography of the Syrian Christian merchant Cosmas Indicopulutus, and his account is datable to the 6th century CE. Now, he was a traveler and writer, and he recorded his ideas about India and Sri Lanka in his book. This account of the subcontinent was based on his personal experiences as a merchant on the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Therefore, his description of India and Sri Lanka are invaluable for the study of early Indian history. Now we go on to this is just an overview of all the accounts that we can use for the study of early Indian history to fill in the gaps that have been left by the other sources that we have used. Now I will give you a review of what I have said. The classical accounts on ancient India are generally prompted by a spirit of exploration of unknown lands and reflect great credit on their authors and the scientific spirit of the age in which they lived. But their statements are not always correct. Essentially, they suffer from the defects inherited in the writing of the foreigners who tend to be ignorant of the language and customs of the country. While great importance naturally attaches to what they recorded from personal observation, we must also take with great reserve their accounts based on others' reports and hearsay evidence. Another point that we might mention here is that as far as the Greeks are concerned, due allowance must be made for the necessarily limited circle within which they must have moved in India and their natural proneness to see everything through Hellenic eyes and distort or exaggerate anything that was strange or unfamiliar to him. Therefore, it would be foolish to belittle the importance of classical accounts of India, but it would be equally unwise to put implicit faith in everything contained in them. As we have already mentioned, from times immemorial, foreign travelers from various countries have visited India. We have already dealt with the classical writers. Now we come to the Chinese travelers. Now, the earliest description about India by a Chinese has been given by the Chinese royal official and diplomat Zhang Qian in circa 125 BCE. He served as an imperial envoy to the world outside of China in the 2nd century BCE during the time of the Han dynasty. He never came to India but acquired knowledge about Sian Duttak or Lower Indus region from various sources. Following him, the Indian subcontinent was later delineated as Tianza. Next, we have the importance and most famous accounts of Fa Hien. The accounts of Chinese pilgrim Fa Hien 337 to 422 CE give a contemporary account of the administration of Chandragupta Vikramaditya of the Gupta dynasty. His work is valuable evidence to the strength and in many places to the dominance of Buddhism in Central Asia and India. His tone throughout the account is that of a devout, learned, sensible, very historical pilgrim traveler. His record is careful and accurate, and most of the places visited by him can be identified. The Chinese traveler Xuanzang 602 to 664 CE visited India during the period of Emperor Harshavardhan of Manoj. He wrote a detailed description of India during the reign of Harsha in his book Siyuki, or Record of the Western Countries. His description has been accepted as the most valuable source of knowing the administrative, social and cultural condition of India. Here I would like to mention, before I go on to the next slide, that most of these travelers, Chinese travelers, came to India because it was a holy land of Buddha. Now they came in search of manuscripts which they were very eager to translate into their own language and carry back to their own country. So most of them never mentioned anything, just incidentally mentions other aspects of society, economy, polity, just incidentally. So we do not get a detailed account of society in these accounts. We have to price out the information wherever possible. So Yuan-sang, we know about Yuan-sang. He had stayed for many years in Nalanda, and it is from him that we come to know about the academic and social life in Nalanda during his time, and the fact that it was endowed with 100 villages, and many of the rulers richly endowed the institution with land and money. So next we come to another Chinese pilgrim's description. He is Aicing. Aicing, 635 to 713 CE, was a 7th century Chinese Buddhist pilgrim who has left behind an account of his travels to India. His account, Qiu Gao Sing Zuan, Qiu Fa Gao Sen Chuan, is a series of brief biographies of Chinese Buddhist pilgrims he met or heard of while he was in China. This work is interesting in that it gives an impression of the numbers of pilgrims who went to India but have left no records of their own. He also described the Buddhist practices in India in their orthodox interpretation and as given in the rules of discipline in the Vinaya texts. Now I give you a review of all the writings of the Chinese travelers. The Chinese travelers have rendered a great service by depicting the state of Buddhism in India. But devout pilgrims as they were, their intense religious faith impaired to a great extent the rational instincts and power of impartial observation. We must therefore be on our guard against accepting as literally true all their statements, especially those which concern the Buddhist faith in any way, even when based on personal observation. Their judgment on men and things were warped, if not vitiated, by an absolute and implicit faith in the superiority of Buddhism and the too intimate, if not exclusive, association with men and institutions connected with that religion. It seems Buddhism alone loomed large in their eyes, and everything else took a subordinate and almost an insignificant place. Such an attitude is hardly compatible with recording an account that may be regarded as strictly historical. Acceptable, how much is it acceptable, their accounts? You must remember that even if we criticize them, they have tried their best to give us a picture about contemporary India, and it is on their accounts that we base our descriptions of society and polity, economy, whatever we want to do. The writings of Chinese travelers to India form a very valuable supplement to the classical accounts. Three of them, Fa Hien, 5th century CE, Xuanzang and Aicing, 7th century CE, spent a number of years in India and learnt its language, and the first two travelled widely almost all over the country. Unfortunately, these eminent Chinese visitors were all Buddhist monks whose journey to India was merely a pilgrimage to holy lands and whose outlook was purely religious. So, naturally we have to be careful about taking at its face value the whole account that they give. Therefore, neither Fa Hien nor Aicing refer to secular matters except very incidentally. Xuanzang is not so circumscribed, but gives some interesting information about his royal patron Harshavardhan and other contemporary kings of India. He also briefly refers to the political conditions of the kingdoms through which he passed and devotes an entire chapter to a general account of India. However, like all other sources, the acceptability of Chinese sources can only be determined by the supportive evidences from other sources. Fortunately, we find data in Chinese sources which help us to reconstruct socio-economic history of India. In 1225 CE, a high official of the Department of Foreign Commerce of the Sung dynasty, Zhao Rigu, wrote Chu Fan Chi, where various regions of India, especially ports and commercial centers and various commercial products, have been referred to. Now we come to another aspect, but before we conclude, I can just sum up that we have often relied on these Chinese sources for a study of the society and economy of the contemporary times, because though they have referred to these aspects incidentally, they have helped us enormously in filling in gaps that have been left by the other sources. So they have been invaluable in our reconstruction of early Indian history and society. Now we go on to the last aspect of our study, of our present study, the Arab, Persian and other sources. Now a majority, the earliest accounts consist of travel and geographical descriptions by Arab and Persian travelers. Apart from these, there are statements regarding battles and the spread of Islamic religion in India. The usefulness of these sources is dependent on the fact that there is no controversy regarding their date and time. This is because their data is determined by Al-Hijra, that is circa 622 CE. The first Arab invasion in Sindh region in 711 CE has been described in the Chachnama and in the composition of Al-Biladuri. The Persian work Hudud al-Alam is important for a study of geography, but the name of the author is not known. The commercial connection of India with West Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia and the Mediterranean region via land and sea route within brackets 9th to 13th century CE is known from the writings of Sulaiman ibn Qudadba, al-Masudi, al-Idrisi and the like. But many of the writings of the Arab travelers are based on hearsay evidence, and so they are not reliable, and there are many exaggerations and mistakes in these works. Now we come to the best foreign account of India, and that is Al-Biruni's account, which has been translated by Sachau as Al-Biruni's India. The best foreign account of India that this age produced was written by Al-Biruni. This great Arabic scholar engaged himself in the study of the culture and civilization of the country. He learned Sanskrit and studied its different branches of literature. So he was a very learned man. We know that he had studied the various literature, that even philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, the various kinds of scientific literature that is found in India, and he was a very learned man. He patiently labored hard to acquire knowledge of the Indian society and culture in a laudable spirit of quest for truth, and brought to his task a liberal and rational mind enriched by profound knowledge remarkable for his age. But his work suffers from two serious defects. Firstly, he says little or nothing of the political condition of India. Secondly, his work is primarily based on the study of Indian literature and not on his personal observations. Now just a little more about Al-Biruni's India. He had a very rational mind. When we study his text, we see that he has very liberally pointed out that why Hindus in India not satisfied with the Islamic invaders or the kings who governed during that time, because he was very frankly, he revealed that because we have destroyed their kingdom, the regions of India, just spoiled their properties, and that they have been forced to disperse to other regions. They were naturally not satisfied with the Muslims who had come to India. We find such liberal statements all over his work, and he has pointed out the difference between them and us in his text. Now, after him, we have all the other sources. Like recent years, scholars have placed a great deal of importance on some documents belonging mainly to the 11th and the 12th century CE. These include letters of Jewish merchants regarding commercial activities along with legal documents. These merchants regularly visited the ports on India's western coast from various regions of Egypt, West Asia and North Africa. A great deal of data regarding various aspects of Indian life is available from these documents. We go now more or less for early India. We have divided our sources into classical Chinese and Arabic Persian sources. Now altogether, I have discussed in the previous modules about indigenous sources, including the archaeological sources. So I think for early India, we have supportive and corroborative evidence from the foreign sources to reconstruct a holistic history of early India. Once we come to the medieval period, we have various kinds of books such as chronicles, which we will now delve into. Now, 2 centuries later than Al-Biruni, we have the Muslim Turks establish their political supremacy over India and introduce the art of compiling chronicles recording the political events of the country. The earliest work of this kind, the Tabakat-e-Nasiri by Minhaj-ud-Din, composed in the middle of the 13th century CE, traces the history of Muslim rule in India from the beginning with such fullness of details as the author could derive from a patient study of all the materials available. Amongst the other works, we have other works being produced at regular intervals, and the following deserve mention. Among them are Tariq-e-Firuz-Rahim by Ziauddin Barani and Shams-e-Siraz Afif, Gulshan-e-Ibrahimi by Muhammad Qasim Farishta, Ain-e-Akbari and Akbarnama by Abul Fazal, Tabakat-e-Akbari by Nizamuddin Ahmad, and Muntakhab-ut-Tawarik by Abd-ul-Qadir Badauni. Now we have other kinds of works from foreign travelers, such as the earliest being that of Marco Polo, who visited India and other parts of Asia towards the close of the 13th century. He does not, however, tell us much about the political history, but interestingly, I would like to refer herein to his various aspects of social life that he refers to, about the way Indian people dress, men and women dress, what they eat and what they cook, and various other interesting aspects have been dwelled by him in his text. The most important account in this respect is that of Ibn Battuta, an African Mohammedan who spent several years in the court of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He returned to his native country in 1349 CE after 25 years of travel in various parts of India. He has left a vivid account of India of his times, whose general accuracy there is no reason to dispute. Now, for the Mughal period, We have the voluminous writings of European travelers, including reports of Jesuit missionaries and official dispatches of the Portuguese, French and English trading settlements. They all supply a mass of authentic information regarding contemporary society or the material milieu that they found themselves in. Now we have later accounts. A number of other European travelers have left interesting information about various parts of India, particularly the powerful kingdom of Vijayanagar. We all know that this was an important kingdom in the Deccan, and its flourishing state have been referred to by a number of foreign travelers who visited India during his time, and the kingdom especially. An important traveller who visited India in the 15th century CE and wrote about the kingdom was the Venetian Niccolo di Conti. Domingo Paes, he was a Portuguese, Eduardo Barbosa and Abdul Razak, who was a Persian, also visited the kingdom and wrote informative accounts of the inhabitants' trade and social and political life of this time. We go on to a review of the foreign accounts of the period. Now, for the medieval period stretching from 1200 to 1700 CE, the historian of India is no longer hampered by the lack of material as in the first or the earlier period. He can trace the main outline of political history with essential details and do not have to pierce together fragmentary data from coins and inscriptions by a tedious and laborious process. His principal difficulty is to sift the truth from a mass of data which sometimes contradict one another, and to assess correctly the statements of historians and which are not infrequently colored by passions and prejudices. But these are difficulties which are common to historians of all ages and countries. So we come to the end of just a discussion of all the sources which can be used for reconstructing the history of India in all its aspects, social, cultural, political and economic, from all the sources, foreign sources that we can gather. I have discussed the indigenous social sources in the first module, and we have found that to construct a symmetrical history of India relying only on indigenous sources along with archaeological literary sources along with archaeological sources is a difficult task, because the intention of the writers of these literary sources or the inscriptions was not to reconstruct a history of India, but just to give the information that they could gather. Now, to fill in all the gaps, we have to rely on foreign sources which had given us adequate data in this regard. So, for a complete and holistic study of the history of India, we have to rely on all the sources, and we have to corroborate and supplement each of the sources with other sources. Thank you.